As we talked about last week, the geography of the ancient Aegean is made up of the mainland of Greece, the Cycladic Islands, and the island of Crete and its subsidiaries. Here's a refresher of that area. Last week we discussed the geometric, orientalizing, and archaic periods. These styles were influenced by the surround cultures, including the Minoans and the Egyptians. This week we will discuss the classical period. The classical period in Greek art history is dated from the defeat of the Persians by the Hellenic city-states. The threat of Persian occupation and rule bonded the Greeks together, and a golden age of Greek culture, arts, and thought followed. Classical period architecture. Acropolis, Athens. The greatest achievements in architecture came during the classical period, the best example being the Acropolis in Athens. According to history, the Persians destroyed the original Acropolis in 480 BC. The Athenians were later able to drive the Persians from their city. The Athenians managed the treasury and required members to pay an annual tribute. Pericles used the tribute surplus to finance the rebuilding of Acropolis. Funds came from abuse of his power in bullying other city-states and taking all of the tribute money for Athens and not distributing it equally. This is a view of Acropolis in the mid-19th century. It had laid in ruins for hundreds of years and was overgrown with vegetation. But you can get a great idea of what Acropolis means from this picture. The temples were typically built on a hill or highest point in the city so they could be seen from all around. Parthenon, 447 to 438 BC. The fact that the Parthenon still exists is a miracle. It was made into a Byzantine and then later Catholic church in the Middle Ages, and also an Islamic mosque. Each time it was modified structurally. It has been bombed and plundered for artifacts. Today it is being threatened by pollution. The Parthenon was the centerpiece of the Acropolis. It was the temple to the goddess Athena, protector of the city of Athens. Built by Kallikratos and Kallikratis, the exterior is Doric. This structure was treated in much the same way as the sculpture. It was meant to be seen from all sides and entered from all sides, with no one side being emphasized. The architects, like Kallikratos, believed that beauty came from the strict adherence to harmonious numerical ratios. It also had what the Greeks considered to be perfect mathematical proportions. The formula x equals 2y plus 1 was what the Greeks called the golden mean. These proportions were applied to the exterior dimensions, the size of the cella, interior room where the statue of the goddess were kept, and to the relationship between the width of the column and the spacing of the columns. However, there were also many tweaks or optical illusions because the appearance was most important. The stylobate curves upward at the center of both sides and the facade forming a kind of shallow dome, and this curvature is echoed in the entablature. The columns lean in slightly, and those at the corners are about 2 inches thicker than the others. This meant that every block and drum had to be carved specifically for where it was going. The effect is kind of architectural contrapposto. The adjustments were made to make it look perfect. The purpose of the structure was to house a large gold statue of the goddess Athena. The exterior was lavishly decorated with sculpture. In sculpture, we will see the classical Greeks went beyond realism and strove for perfection in their human sculptures. These idealized forms developed into a mastery of the human body in a multitude of positions. They demonstrated a thorough understanding of how the body moves. Cretios boy, 480 BC. The classical period, the height of Greek sculpture, created a much more lifelike human figure. The Cretios boy was the final break with the stylized Egyptian striding position. Here the artist explored the idea that all body parts are linked and that as one part moves, the rest must react. His position is called the contrapposto position. The contrapposto position is a natural position of weight shift, where all weight is put on one leg with the other knee bent. The hips dip in the direction of the bent knee and the shoulders angle toward the weight-bearing leg. This is a much more realistic look, actually, how a human being stands. Zeus, 460 to 450 BC. In contrast to his stillness and calmness, the charioteer statue, another bronze also found off the coast of Greece in a shipwreck, is the figure of Zeus. Or is it Poseidon? If it was a thunderbolt he held in his head, he could be Zeus. If it was a triton, then Poseidon. The arms are completely away from the body now. Lost wax method. Large statues such as this were made in parts. First, the sculptor made a full-size clay model. Then a clay mold was made around the model and removed in sections. A layer of beeswax was applied to the inside of each mold, but left hollow. When the wax cooled, the clay mold was removed, and there was a wax model left. Details were carved. A final clay mold investment was applied to the model, and liquid clay was poured inside the hollow wax. Metal pins were driven through the new mold to connect the investment with the clay core. The wax was melted out by the hot metal being poured in. When the metal cooled and hardened, it was in the shape of the wax. Pieces were soldered together and imperfections smoothed. In the early and high classical period, the Greeks had generally believed that rational human beings could impose order on their environment, create perfect statues, and discover correct mathematical formulas for constructing temples. The Peloponnesian War and the 4th century's unceasing strife brought an end to the 5th century's serene idealism. Disillusionment and alienation followed. Greek thought and Greek art began to focus more on the individual and on the real world of appearances rather than on the community and the ideal world of perfect beings and perfect buildings. The Greeks loved their plays. I believe there are 2 theaters on the Acropolis. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew a lot about building theaters and stadiums, so much so that much of our modern designs are patterned off of theirs. They were able to build structures with amazing acoustics, better than ours, an incredibly clever means of moving large groups of people in and out of them. Scrapper, 330 BC. Another great sculptor employed by Alexander the Great was Lysippus. Alexander the Great even had Aristotle, as a tutor. Lysippus introduced a new canon of proportions that was more slender. This example was originally a bronze. This is a Roman copy in marble. Remember, you can always tell the Roman copy if there is a tree stump supporting the leg. The Romans weren't as skilled at marble sculpting as the Greeks were. This is a sculpture of an athlete scraping oil from his body after exercising. It is supposed to really be seen from all angles, not just front. Similar to the architecture, right? Hermes and the infant Dionysus, 340 BC. The new humanization of Greek sculpture can be found in the works of Praxiteles. He combined the ideal beauty of the previous artists and added a worldly sensuousness. Probably a copy of super high quality, this piece shows Hermes and the infant Dionysus found in the temple of Hera at Olympia. Hermes is about to give Dionysus the nymphs to be raised. Here, the tree trunk is part of the composition, unlike the Romans' use of the tree trunk. Holding a bunch of grapes, playfully teasing the infant Dionysus, god of wine. Tender and human interaction that one finds in real life is now part of statuary. Notice the S-curve composition, which is typical of Praxiteles.